Eylon Levy, who is the official spokesperson for the Israeli government, joins us now. Eylon, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good evening.
How do we differentiate? Because I agree with what you've just said, but how do people differentiate between what is propaganda and what isn't?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Well, a lot of people are blaming each other at the moment, and it's getting lost, I suppose, if you want to use the cliche, in the fog of war. But we're hearing, you know, like we heard 500 people just killed in this hospital, long before anybody could have known how many people were killed.
And it was Israel, of course, they said, and it wasn't.
Yeah. And you know, the BBC went with it, everybody went with it.
They went with it in 10 minutes when you could never have... and they're still going with those figures.
How do you feel about this propaganda that is going out all over the world, which seems to be anti-Israeli?
You're right, there is fog of war, but we also have a moment of unprecedented moral clarity. You know, the atrocities that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th, when it burned, beheaded, butchered, raped, tortured, mutilated its way through southern Israel, was a wake-up call. It was a moral test for the world. Many people stood up, understood that moral test, and clearly stated Israel's right and duty to defend itself, and many failed that test. And I have to say, it has been horrifying to see around the world expressions of pro-jihad sentiment, people taking the sides of the murderers who, with the most indescribable cruelty, burned whole families alive, raped little girls, and committed that atrocious massacre on October 7th. Now, I'm glad you're talking about that hospital sham, the story from a few weeks ago, because everyone needs to not only take with a huge pinch of salt information coming from out of the Gaza Strip, but actively disbelieve Hamas. Hamas, the same terror organization that on October 7th burned and beheaded people and then lied about it to the whole world, then sent a memo to the whole world on that day saying that an Israeli airstrike on a hospital had killed 800 people. The sun came up in the morning. It was clear the hospital was still standing. The death toll was much lower, and it wasn't an Israeli airstrike. It was, in fact, a Palestinian rocket that had misfired. We know that Hamas is waging a war of propaganda. We know that it is waging...
But they're still listening to Hamas. Why are they still quoting Hamas to BBC and Sky?
That really is astonishing. And, you know, I've noticed a difference in the press that instead of saying Gaza Health Ministry, they're saying Hamas-run health ministry. So at least people know that they're getting their information.
Not in all places.
Violence. You've had it, not in all of them, but it's definitely a welcome move. But really, we expect media to exercise more caution before...
And zero terrorists, by the way. Have you noticed zero terrorists?
Elon,
which is astonishing. You know, we've seen so many pictures from inside
Elon,
Gaza. No one's ever seen a picture of a single dead terrorist.
Let me, we've seen them, but we've also seen some of them twitching underneath the blankets when they were supposed to be dead. But how can ordinary people, because all we're seeing on the media around the world at the moment are people who are dead and they're supposed to be, you know, civilians, we don't know, but we're not seeing any real propaganda coming back from your side. We're not being, you know, we're told about the hospital, there's this strike on the ambulances today, mind you,
used as a military vehicle.
Mind you, if I was going to plan something like that, I'd probably use...
But well, they use UN vehicles and ambulances. It's a well-known thing.
But they're not coming back, Israel, and saying, you know, this is all wrong. This is not happening.
They did with the hospital bomb.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're quite right that we don't put out propaganda. We're a liberal democratic state with a professional army and civil service. We don't play the same games as terrorist organizations. But, you know, I was on the radio, other spokespeople were on the radio explaining exactly what Hamas did yesterday. It tells the whole world that Israel attacked an ambulance, and immediately it becomes clear that Hamas was using that ambulance in grave violation of international law in order to ferry terrorists around. So we're making that case. Unfortunately, the terrorists in the Gaza Strip have shock value on their side. They have no compunctions about lying. We're professional spokespeople. We have to check the truth. We have to tell the truth. We have to check the truth and be absolutely sure what we're saying. And the terrorist organization that burned and beheaded people on October 7th doesn't have to do that. And so that definitely gives them an upper hand in that information war.
Because when I interview people on the side, very few people who admit to being on Hamas's side, but when I interview them, they just want to shout out a whole tirade.
They'll never
propaganda.
Condemn Hamas.
Could you stop interrupting?
Well, you'll notice they never condemn Hamas.
The fact is that I don't understand how the world's media seems to be so anti-Semitic, and it must have come as a bit of a shock to you too.
First of all, I think a lot of the journalists here are doing terrific work exposing the horrors of October 7th, and I definitely wouldn't want to stick a label like that on everyone in the media. But of course, substantial bias against the state of Israel and against Israel has been a long-running theme of much of the coverage. We see it, for example, in the refusal to call terrorism terrorism. You know, imagine how ridiculous it would be if on 7/7 in London we saw headlines saying militancy comes to central London instead of terror strikes central London. There is no other way to describe beheading and burning innocent people.
What are your thoughts as a government spokesman about the BBC?
We work with the BBC. Needless to say, we have pointers for how the coverage may be improved
but the
and rendered more accurate.
Have become very anti-Semitic in the way they have behaved, and they actually angle all the reports in a way that makes people feel very sorry, and we do feel sorry
like the Guardian on TV,
anybody who is caught in the line of fire who is a civilian. You know, it is awful. It's appalling.
But Israel killed actually the least innocent civilians.
Just a minute, shush. I want to know why you think it's worth carrying on having a conversation with the BBC.
I would not necessarily attach that label to its coverage, but we would certainly like to see everyone in the British media call Hamas terrorists. Hamas is prescribed as a terror organization under UK law. This is simply stating a fact that they are terrorists, and we think that would help the British public understand what is going on, what Israel is facing against, and why Israel is fighting so hard to defend its people.
What do you think can be done now to bring us right forward to end this conflict, and to end this conflict for well, probably not all time, but at least a good amount of time in the future? A lot of people are saying, why don't you ask your guest how the Palestinians must feel being occupied? I don't think some people realise that you are attacked every single day, and it's just got to the situation now where it's the major news story, but this has been going on a long time. What is the solution? Is it a two-state solution?
I'm not going to speculate on the long-term political horizon. For now, we're focusing on defeating Hamas. The objective now to end this war is that Hamas has to go. Hamas can no longer be allowed to fire thousands of rockets at us to massacre our people. Hamas has to go. And so this war isn't going to end soon. It's going to be long, it's going to be hard, and we'll wipe it out just like you wiped out ISIS.
If you were to see them come out of their bunkers and their tunnels and their holes and wherever else they're hiding, carrying a white flag, would you then, and you could arrest them and you could put them in jail, would you consider then that that was the end, or are you looking for total annihilation?
I wish we lived in a world in which every member of Hamas could come out and surrender and hand themselves in, and we could end this peacefully, but that's not the nature of the genocidal terror organization that we know is going to fight tooth and nail to continue hurting our people, and so we'll continue fighting.
What do you think about them? The media keep banding around war crimes, what this siege is a war crime, when Israel only provide 10% of electricity, the siege is a war crime, everything's the ambulance is a war crime. They never wait to hear the evidence that shows it isn't a war crime.
No, this is clearly ridiculous. War crimes are perpetrated by Hamas. War crimes are perpetrated by Hamas, which deliberately targets the Israeli people while hiding behind the Palestinian people. That's a double war crime.
They're shooting them when they were trying to leave. I saw the footage yesterday.
And today we opened a humanitarian corridor to facilitate people to leave, and they shot at our troops trying to secure a humanitarian corridor. So we're fighting against the war criminals of Hamas. We're fighting to uphold international peace and security and international law.
And 700,000 have already moved south, are in relative safety. It's not totally safe in the south.
Around a million. Our numbers are only around 100,000 still remain in the north because we've given them 3 weeks to evacuate.
And Israel citizens have had to all move from their areas as well. So
exactly. The whole area around the whole area around the Gaza Strip and the north as well. We've evacuated entire towns. We have 250,000 internally displaced persons in Israel. Country full of evacuees.
Eylon, because we are short of time, just one last question, if I may. Is there anything that Israel feels they could do or should do to make it easier to get the civilians out of that area? Particularly, we heard today quite a number of British passport holders who can't get out. Or are there reasons they're not being allowed out?
We want to see foreign passport holders get out of the Gaza Strip. First and foremost, the 240 Israeli hostages, they're also foreign passport holders, and we're demanding their release. And shockingly, Hamas has been stopping foreign nationals from getting out. We even heard America saying Hamas is giving it demands in order to allow them to let the Americans out. And that's, of course, outrageous for Hamas to hold thousands of foreign nationals hostage, in addition to the 240 innocent Israelis they abducted on October 7th.
All right. Eylon, thank you very much indeed.